Hello everybody and welcome back to the Dovetail Box series. In this video, I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot problems when it comes to fitting dovetails. Let's get going. Now in this video, the main problem I'm going to show you how to sort out is when you cut the sockets, I want to show you how to chisel back to the line precisely if you haven't quite committed to cutting it with a saw first. As I said in the last video, this is a common thing that beginners experience because it is quite scary putting the saw right up against the line that you know is the definite point that you need to get accurate. Some people would prefer to chisel back to that. So in this video, I want to show you how to do it. And what I will say in this video is that the tails kind of need to be perfect in order to start adjusting this socket, because like the last thing you want to do is start adjusting the tails when you've already traced around them in order to nest them into the socket, because that's obviously going to change the dimensions. It's going to throw things out. All the adjustments we're going to be doing in this video are on the sockets. So when you do this, make sure you've got a perfect set of tails, and if you screw up the sockets, then you can just make a new board, but it means you can keep this component and trace it onto a new one instead. So take the time to get the tails perfect, do lots of sawing practice, make sure they're perfectly square, make sure your shoulder lines are accurate, and then you can move on to the tips in this video where we're going to be adjusting the sockets. So here we've got a set of sockets that we haven't done too well on. You can see we've got a little bit of the knife line there, a little bit of the knife line there, no idea what happened here, and then we've got a bit of the knife line. So fortunately, we're all within the waist side of the material. That shouldn't really be an excuse at this point. If you've marked the waist, then hopefully at this point you've cut the correct side of the line. So all the lines are there, it's just we've got varying distances away from them. So when troubleshooting joints such as this, it's worth having an image or an idea as to when the joint is assembled, you know which edges and which corners and which faces are going to be on show once the joint is assembled. That way, you know which edges you can kind of get away with if they're not on show. We said in the previous video that if you get a bit of crushing in the bottom of the socket, it's not going to be shown. If you have a bit of an undercut in the bottom of the socket, it's not going to be shown. The other corner that people don't usually think of is this back edge here. You're going to see the top corner, so you don't want to disturb that at all. But let's say from 3mm down from that, you're not going to see any of this face. And like, if I assemble this dovetail joint, you'll see. There you go. So we can see the top corner, but that back edge completely disappeared. You're never going to see it. So that gives us a little bit of leeway when it comes to sorting out this socket that we've absolutely mullered, because now, as opposed to working to 3 lines, the front, top and back, we've only really got to get the front and the top exact. The back one, if that breaks out a bit or there's a bit of an undercut on it, then it's not going to be the end of the world. Obviously, as we said in the previous video, it can't be wedged in because that is still going to cause the wedging action that splits the dovetails apart. But if it's undercut slightly, you're not going to see it. Now, as I said before, I'm not aiming to get an undercut on anything here. What I'm saying here is that if you get an undercut as a result of trying to fix something or whatever, if there's an undercut there, it's not the end of the world, but it's probably not something you should aim for, because it is going to weaken the joint somewhat, because it is going to weaken the joint to some extent, like not extensively, but you probably get the picture. So if an undercut happens, it's not the end of the world, but perhaps don't aim for it. Now, if you've been following my online school up until this point and you've watched all my videos on how to cut certain joints, you'll know about my technique of establishing edges before removing the bulk of the material. And that is what we're going to be doing here with this dovetail. For those of you that haven't watched those videos, firstly, go and watch them. Secondly, establishing the edges refers to putting your chisel in the knife lines or marking gauge lines, whatever, and doing a few small taps, about 1mm or 2mm down, taking it out, putting it into another knife wall, do a few taps that way, 2mm in or something like that, and do it in from the other side. So you've got 3 edges that you've then established and broken material away from. Then all you've got to do is remove the material in the middle without touching any of those outside corners. Now, you have got to be quite careful with this, because as you can see on this piece of poplar, the grain it's not going down vertical, it's kind of sloping off to the bottom left there. So if I don't establish these edges in the correct order, there's a chance that that grain may split in a direction that I don't want to. So in this instance, if I put the chisel into the end grain here, then the wood is going to split in towards the waste area, which won't be the end of the world. It's similar to planing with the grain as opposed to against the grain. However, if I then put the chisel round to this side and I try and chisel out this waste, that grain, as soon as I split the first bit of material from that top edge, it may split down following the rest of the grain here and create a gap in that kind of triangle there. And this is one of those things that you develop an eye and I guess a feel for during your woodworking experience or experience of woodworking. Being able to accurately predict which way the wood fibres are going to split and knowing how to sever those fibres and how to establish edges in order to prevent that from happening or to minimise the damage caused by that happening. That's all stuff that takes a little bit of experience, but when it's pointed out, as I'm about to show you now, it's something that becomes a lot clearer. So what I'm saying is pay real attention to grain direction when doing this, because it will give you a lot of indications as to what's going to happen and what may go wrong before you actually take that action. So for this line on the right, as I said, I'm fairly confident that if I chisel to that, the grain direction is going to work in my favour because it's going to split into the waste side. But I don't really want to risk that. Although I'm 95% sure it'll be okay, chances are the remaining 5% is going to be the 5% that bites me in the arse later on. So although this technique will be a lot quicker, I don't want to rush this stage. I want to get it perfect, and I'm going to make sure that I've got at least a 99% chance of it going the way I intend. So this front corner is going to be the corner that's on show when the joint is assembled. So I want to make sure that that is bang on the money. So I want to establish this corner first, then maybe the back edge. And once I've done that, I can establish the top, because then if that top was to split in whatever direction, at least I've got that front corner established. If this inside wall is slightly undercut or something like that, then as we know, it's hidden. It doesn't matter. That front corner is going to be the one that people see and is going to be the one that hides whatever goes on in there. Now, I would just like to reiterate, we're not aiming for an undercut here. I'm just saying if it's a result of what we're about to do here, then it's not the end of the world. Now, I mentioned earlier about having an awareness of severing fibres before cutting them, and that is something that you'll need to do here before chiseling into this wall, because the fibres at the bottom of this remaining material, granted it's only 0.5 millimetre or so, that is still going to be attached to the area down here. So as I push this through, it's going to provide more and more resistance as I try and follow this line. So what I'll do, on the front face, I will get a chisel and I'll just carefully push it in like that. Now I've barely gone over the line. It's a very small amount. It's no deeper than the marking gauge line itself. So that has separated this front piece of material left over within the socket from the area below. And I could probably just pop that off now. There you go. It comes off like that. Let's just do that bottom area. Boom. That's the front wall established, and that's bang on the money, bang on the line that we scratched around with a knife earlier. But we've still got the problem for the rest of it. Now, it's difficult because you can't really get a chisel in to sever that entire angle. So what I would do is get a knife instead. This is another reason why I really like these Swan Morton blades. You get one of these and you carefully sever the fibres across like that, being careful not to hit the back line, the front line, or this front edge here. You just want to get it all within the area of that wall. You just want to get it all within the area of that socket and sever those fibres at the bottom. So now, when we go along this wall, they're all going to split off easily. Now let's flip it round and do the back edge of that socket. So this entire edge, minus that top corner, is completely hidden, but I do want to make sure it's square anyway. We'll just sever the fibres at the bottom first. Chisel will then go into that line, and with a careful twist, just carefully break it out like that. Okay, now let's flip this back round to the face, because this is the face that I'm going to see and the one that I need to get accurate. And now I'm going to get a chisel that is wide enough to span the entire thickness of the piece of material. And I'm going to make a decision as to whether I need to do that in 2 chops or 1 chop. I think that's close enough to do it in 1. And we're just going to do a few taps down at 90 degrees here, maybe about 1 millimetre or so. We're not going to split this all the way to the bottom. So make sure you're confident that that chisel is firmly locked in the line, and a couple of taps down like that, just to sever that material. So now let's reassess what we've got. A line down the front, which we know is bang on the money, one at the back that's on the money, and this top edge, you can just sort of like flake that away. You don't need to do this with a knife, it's just for demonstrations, but that has been separated from the material that we need to keep. So at this point, you can get your chisel in from the front face like this, and I'm literally holding the chisel into that little ledge that we've established at the front. And what we're going to do is just carefully, light pressure, pushing from behind, just wiggle it up and down, and it's going to separate that material. And you can see that it's really nicely peeling away because we severed those fibres at the bottom with the knife to begin with. If you didn't do that, these are all going to be attached at the bottom, and it's going to get more difficult to push this through. So we'll go to, I don't know, about 3/4 of the way through, little twist, fibres have already been severed, so that material just breaks straight off. And now let's flip it round, rest it on that ledge that we have previously made, and now I'm pushing it into the wall, wiggle it up and down, and just track that line on the top edge. And there we go. Split that away. Sorted. And there you go. By establishing all those edges and removing the remaining waste, it means that you've preserved those exposed corners and removed the remaining material with maximum control. So I'll just get through the remaining 2 walls on this socket, and then we'll address this one that's like 2 or 3 millimeters out afterwards. Now here we go. We've got to remove this big chunk of material now. So the grain direction, as we've already discussed, is going to the bottom left like that. So the last thing I want to do is go into the end grain, because that is just not going to split in the direction I want. Which means in order to get maximum control, I've got to go across the grain. So what we're going to do is keep alternating between severing fibres at the bottom and then splitting material off coming in from the face. Once we've done that, split the fibres again, pair them away, split, pair, and keep doing that until we're about 0.5 millimeter away from the line. Then we'll do exactly the same as what we did on the previous ones. And when I do this, because there's a lot of material to remove, I'm not going to go all the way through to the back edge. I'm only going to work to halfway and then flip it round and come back through from the other way. So let's go through with it. Sever the fibres on the front edge. Get that chisel as far in as possible, and then let's just knife along the bottom. Just work back and forth a little bit. Now we'll remove the first bit of material. So let's go about there, working through to halfway, little wiggles, sever the fibres. And we'll do the same. Cut the bottom, work in a little bit more, half the material again. And there we go. So now on that front, we're no more than 0.5 millimeter away, probably a little bit less to be honest. Flip it round and do the same from the other side. Sever the fibres, get in with a knife, split the material away. Once again, sever the fibres at the bottom, split the material away. And now we'll do the same process as before. Let's just sever those fibres, chisel into the knife line on the back and carefully wobble it forwards. Separate that material so that we then establish the back. Flip it round, sever the fibres at the bottom, chisel into that line. Sever those away and then chisel into the top. Carefully tap away those fibres just to separate them a little bit, and then into the front and carefully pair along that line to halfway. Flip it round and we'll just finish it off from the other side. And now that should be okay to tap the dovetails in. Now you can see, because we're right on the lines, you can actually just push that in pretty much. Let's finish it off with a mallet. But what do we have here? Gaps on the baseline, and no matter how much I mallet this, you can hear that that's completely bottomed out. They ain't going anywhere. What's causing that? So these gaps are caused by one of two things, or maybe even two of two things, and that is either a bump in the bottom of this socket, which means the tail is touching in the center before it hits either of these outside corners, or there's a little bit of fluff in the corners. Like I say, it could be one of two of those, it could be both of them, but at this point we need to check it with a square and see what's actually going on here. And sure enough, if I put a square in from the reverse side, you can see there's a little bit of light under that front corner. If I tilt it down, you'll see it disappear. So we've got a bump in the middle. Let's get it nice and low in the vise, and we'll carefully get rid of that bump. Now you can obviously see all the rubbish in the corner there as well. That is also something we need to remove. Any small remnants of wood left over here can and will stop that tail from bottoming out. So you've really got to make sure you get rid of it. So nice sharp chisel, pare through that end grain, work to halfway. Now I'm aiming to get the chisel flat when I'm doing this, but if anything, I guess I'm angling it up slightly to put some sort of undercut on it. But as I said, it's very, very shallow. You're not aiming to put an undercut in this. You're simply aiming to remove those bumps and the rubbish in the corners to help those tails bottom out. And if you find it easier at this point, you can also get a knife and just finish off those corners with that. You can be really precise with this. So let's get the dovetail assembled and see where we're at. It is nice when they're just a push fit like that. So you can see we got a nice tight fit with these. There is that tiny gap there right in the center of the screen now. Little gaps like that aren't a problem at all. They're so easy to fill because once glue is applied to the dovetail, it's going to expand the wood fibres somewhat. And there's a few things we can do with planing, which will help fill that gap without the use of any filler or glue or anything like that. It fills the gap completely naturally, and it's a really easy thing to do after assembly. And there you go. That is how you adjust minor problems when it comes to cutting dovetail joints. When it comes to things such as cutting the wrong side of the line or cutting below the baseline or having tails that are out of square, those are generally major problems, i.e. if you cut the wrong side of the line, then depending on your tolerance levels, then you may need to remake that piece. You could get a little bit of veneer and fill the gap, which has been caused as a result of cutting on the wrong side of the line, but it never really looks great. If you want to get this right, then you need to make sure that your tails are spot on. They shouldn't need any adjusting at all, and if you are going to adjust them, it's very similar to what we did on the pins here. Sever the outside fibres first and then pare back to them with a chisel, paying careful attention to grain direction. But make sure you adjust the tails before tracing around them into the sockets. So I do hope you found that video useful. If you want to see another beginner have a go at doing this before you go ahead and have a crack at it yourself, then be sure to watch the student series we're filming, where my cameraman Rob is going to be making this box following the exact videos that you're watching now, and undoubtedly he'll probably uncover some more problems when it comes to assembling this joint, which I will be able to guide him through, and you guys will obviously be able to benefit from that as well. So you are now ready to move on to the next lesson, which you can do so by clicking the link below, and if you haven't already, please consider pressing the subscribe button to the left hand side of this video. I will see you in the next one.